Well, this video is long overdue. Truth be told, I really thought we'd have some kind of playable version of Hades 2 right now, at least early access, and probably a while ago, but clearly I was wrong about that. So in the meantime, why don't we finally speculate a bit more on what I would like to see different in Hades 2 versus Hades 1, maybe some things added, maybe even some things removed. And if you're new here, you might be wondering why you should care about what I think about Hades 2. Well, I played Hades a lot, and I got to know some of the members of the studio, was involved in the speedrun community for a long time, and have created an ass ton of content for the game too. So I definitely got some opinions about Hades 2, but I also recognize that what I want as a content creator is probably not what the average player wants. But I am very curious what y'all would like to see differently in Hades 2, even if it's just a minute detail, so let me know in the comments. Alright, first off, let's talk about weapons. Specific weapons aren't really high up on my list of gotta haves or anything, but I did always love this specific image of Zagreus holding a whip in Hades 1. You see, in early access, the fists weren't introduced until quite a bit into development, so there was a lot of speculation around what the sixth weapon was going to be. I had always hoped for a medium-range whip, maybe with something like the aspect of Megara, to flesh out the weapon arsenal. No particular reason as to why the whip, I just thought it would look cool. Maybe I like Castlevania a bit too much. Anyway, I'd like to carry this curiosity onto Mel and hope that she could use a whip weapon also. Maybe the basic attack could lash out toward enemies and have a 3-hit combo, with the final hit being a large AoE around Mel. Maybe the special could grab an enemy and swing them around, knocking other enemies into traps and walls. One of the aspects could borrow from Talos and suck enemies in with the attack perhaps. Another aspect could fling Mel toward the enemies and leap over them using the special maybe. This is all assuming that we're even gonna have the same weapon and aspect system in Hades 2. For all we know, things will be completely different, and by judging by the track record of Supergiant Games, that's very possible. Now, I definitely want the weapons and the aspects to return, but maybe we could put a spin on the hammer system where builds don't feel as reliant on specific ones. You know what I mean when you start a run with the spear and you're really hoping for that one hammer to really net you the win, but then you just don't get it and it feels like the ones you did get offered are just useless junk. I'm not sure of a great solution for the Daedalus hammer problem here, and I don't necessarily think that just letting us roll them is correct, since it could discourage experimentation. It could be that the best solution is to balance the hammers just a bit better in Hades 2 than they were in Hades 1. That way it doesn't feel like there's as many dud offerings. I guess I don't have lots of great ideas on how to change the hammer system, but it feels deep down like something could or even should be changed about it. I don't know, what do you guys think? In the meantime, let's talk about gods and boons. We already know that they plan to have all 12 of the Olympian gods in Hades 2, and maybe even more. We might see an additional god or two that is treated a bit more like Hermes was in Hades 1, which means that they have a more limited or specialized boon pool. I think it would be great to get some fire-themed boons in Hades 2, and there are definitely some gods that could help with this. Those fire boons could apply a burn debuff, and I feel like that would be a great addition because I feel like Hades 1 always kind of lacked a lot of damage over time abilities. Another big thing I'd love to see now that we're getting more gods is something kind of like trio boons maybe. So you got duo boons, but now you can get trio boons that are going to require 3 specific gods to collect. Maybe their power level would be on par with legendary boons or something, or maybe even they would give you a whole new move, kind of like call boons or the companion summons. There are a lot of possibilities when it comes to different gods and boons, and I don't want to focus here too long because I feel like they did a great job in Hades 1 when it comes to the boon system, so as long as they stick to mostly that, I'll be happy. But now we have to talk about something that I'm probably a bit too passionate about, the Pact of Punishment. In most ways, the Pact is amazing and great and accomplished exactly what it set out to do. It's pretty safe to say we'll be getting another modular difficulty system in Hades 2 because Supergiant Games always does this in their games. Overall, I think I'd like a little more consideration about the top end of the heat gauge, which is definitely not easy to work with, but let's talk about it. Now, I'm not one of those players that thinks that the max heat in Hades 1 should necessarily be doable or even reasonable, because I do think it actually makes the game really interesting just how difficult it is. However, there are a couple of pacts that are bad apples here that make the game more difficult in a very annoying and frustrating way. Number one is, probably no surprise, approval process. Just throw it in the garbage. Honestly though, I can see why they might want it in the game somehow because it's fun or whatever maybe, but dear God, it's so annoying. Simply starting a high heat run of over 50 with both approval process on means you're probably resetting 5 out of 6 attempts in Chamber 1. It's ridiculous. And I know we can only blame ourselves for picking up this pack of punishment, but eventually it's unavoidable. And once you get to that point, that's when a lot of people get turned away from these very high heat runs because it's just not a fun way to play the game. One solution we did come up as a community though was to allow the player to sacrifice max health or obols to take the forbidden boons if they really want them. The other rough pact is probably one you wouldn't guess: Tight Deadline. Now I actually love this pact of punishment. I'm really glad it's in the game, and I do think it actually contributed to just how popular Hades 1 was as a speedrun game. However, it creates some issues where we can lose runs simply due to bad luck. Now I know it's a roguelike and that'll happen sometimes, but when you don't find the sack and sticks right away and you're on a tight timer, I'm sorry, but I'm going to push that dog right into the river. Now whenever you start a run in any roguelike game, you'd like to think that you have at least a slim chance of winning each time, but with Tight Deadline on, that actually gets removed sometimes. You see, when starting out in Hades, all you have to do is fix your own behavior in order to beat the deadline. But as you keep climbing the heat limits, eventually you're just at the mercy of the game. You might get bad enemy patterns, you might get bad room layouts, you might get bad room offerings, there's so many different things. There are a lot of potential fixes here, and I definitely think that some kind of version of Tight Deadline would be great in Hades too. One thing they could do would be to simply allow us to buy more time in shops or wells via some kind of item. Another balance that could have at least helped in Hades 1 would be to make it so that you always get the Satyr sack at the end of the second tunnel if you have Tight Deadline on. And there is some precedence for these kinds of interactions because once you turn on Tight Deadline, it actually disables survival rooms from showing up in Tartarus. Those are those 45-second timed rooms. So it kind of makes sense that it could disable another piece of RNG that messes with players. But if Hades 1 had one big glaring blemish, I think it has to be Hell Mode. It's just kind of weird. If you don't know what Hell Mode is, you can start a save file where you are forced to play at a minimum of 5 heat, and one of those packs is exclusive to Hell Mode. That particular pact disables the bubble you'd normally get from taking a big chunk of damage, which would leave you invulnerable for a few seconds. It's not the most impactful pact, and it's kind of not a big deal most of the time. And Hell Mode kind of only matters when you first start, but once you have maxed out the mirror and the aspects, it's pretty much meaningless. Besides that one exclusive pact, you can play as if you're on Hell Mode with a regular save just fine. I think a lot of people are confused about Hell Mode because the assumption is that it's a higher difficulty that you can play in Hades, but it's really not. I was surprised to see the game launch with this since it just always felt like an idea that never got fully finished. Honestly, I think it would have been better off without it because it probably wouldn't have confused players or baited them into trying out this supposed higher difficulty. So let's hope they'll think up something different for Hades too. Alright, that's enough venting about something that only affects 0.01% of all players, honestly. Let's move on to something that I think is important: keepsakes. I actually have a major ask of Supergiant Games here, and it's probably not something that most people would ask for or even care about. No more god keepsakes. Or at least have them do something else besides guarantee a boon from that god. Most new players might not be aware of just how powerful the god keepsakes are, but you see, they are the most useful keepsakes for the early zones because they allow you to manipulate your build and nearly guarantee specific powerful combinations. Once you have the knowledge of what works and what doesn't, the god keepsakes guarantee success. Take a look at my average Hades video here on YouTube. You might think to yourself, man, Haelian is so lucky, he always gets the dual boons that he wants. It's the god keepsakes though. Hades 1 has run into an issue where, in order to play optimally, you're always going to start a run with Athena's keepsake in order to get her dash. It's the most powerful boon in the game, and you can nearly guarantee it every single run in Chamber 1. Obviously, most players just wouldn't play this way because it's just not a fun way to play, but I'd still like to see the studio remove this option from us and maybe do something else with that space. Okay, so I've vented about what I'd like to see different in Hades 2, but why don't we switch gears and talk about things I'd like to see added? I think that given the current amount of development time they've already had with the game, I'm putting my money on Hades 2 being much bigger and having some major features we didn't see in the first game. Now, Supergiant has already come out and said that they have no plans to make Hades 2 multiplayer or co-op in any way, and that's not something I'm crazy interested in myself either. But one thing I would love to see is something to help the competitive spirit in the game. Perhaps some online leaderboards for speedrunning purposes or even for how much heat was used. There could be lifetime leaderboards and then monthly, weekly, etc. It could even be sorted by weapon and aspect. Now this wouldn't have really worked in Hades 1 because of how the seeds worked in the game, which is a very long and detailed conversation. But I would like to see them handle seeds differently in Hades 2, since as it is, it's quite a hassle to reset a run, so to speak. Now maybe we could get a different kind of seeded run in Hades 2 where you can race against the shadow of a player who has already completed it. The rooms, boons, and enemies would all be the same between the players, so it's just a race to see who could do it faster. Think about those ghosts that you race in Mario Kart basically. We could also get a special daily or weekly run, which are common in roguelikes, so I'd love to see that as well just to spice things up. These kinds of runs might dictate a specific loadout prior to the start of the run, or maybe add some special modifiers to make them unique. We could also consider other alternative game modes, like maybe endless mode even. I found that most roguelikes don't really pull off an enjoyable endless mode, but I have full faith in Supergiant Games that they could do it, and it might kind of seem like I'm asking for a lot of different things here all at once, but I do think that these things could add a lot of longevity to the game, and if they just add a fraction of what we're asking for here, I think it could help a lot. Speaking of longevity, one thing I really don't want to change is the average run length in Hades 2. Hades 1, to me, has the perfect run length of about 30, maybe 40 minutes, as long as you're not wasting time. And as someone who has played a lot of roguelikes ever since, one issue I've always had is that they often run quite a bit longer than that. But one thing that they could do to expand the game without lengthening each run is to offer alternate biomes. This is actually very common in other roguelikes like Dead Cells, where instead of Tartarus, maybe you'd go somewhere else sometimes. In fact, I'd almost be surprised if this wasn't an addition in Hades 2 at this point because it's just such a common feature in the genre. While we're at it, alternate bosses or endings would be amazing, obviously, and I'd love to have to consider which zone we're going to next and make decisions based on our current weapon, or boons, or aspect, or whatever. Now, I'm very excited for Hades 2, whether or not I get any of these things that I listed here, and I'm very confident in Supergiant. I think they're going to deliver something that we're all going to really love. But I think we should keep in mind that it's going to be really, really hard for them to live up to the hype that Hades 1 was. I mean, just look at the review scores and the critic scores and everything. It's not going to be easy for them to one-up it. But let me know what you would like to see in the sequel, and if you like this video and you want more roguelike and Hades content, please consider subscribing. That way I can bombard you with more listicles. Thanks again. See you later. This time.